Welcome to Distilled Bourbon Podcast. I'm Brent. I'm here with my co-hosts Chuck and Brian. Fellas, it's good to see you. We're back in the turret today. And what can I say? Happy anniversary. Happy birthday to us.
I can't believe it.
Cheers to that.
It's a 1
Today
year.
is our first anniversary as a podcast. We uploaded our first episode 1 year ago today. And today, this marks our 30th episode that we have. So we're moving right along. And man, it's been a fun ride, hasn't it?
It's been a fun year. It's gone awfully fast, to be quite frank.
It has been a lot of fun, and we're still in diapers.
And we are. I played our very first episode.
That was hard to listen to.
That was hard to listen to, wasn't it?
It was.
We've moved along the learning curve just a little bit and are a little more entertaining. If you like this show, if you're still with us, thank you. Hopefully you've already hit that subscribe button, that like button. Share it on Facebook with your friends. Tell your mom and dad. We appreciate that. It helps us out. But mostly just thank you for listening to three idiots talk about our love for bourbon. And that's what we've done. We've been to several distilleries.
We have.
We've gone to Peerless. We've hit MB Roland. We've been down to our friends at Casey Jones, Green River. All those were great tours.
Spirits of French Lick.
Spirits of French Lick. Absolutely. We've had some great guests on. We've had our friends Brad Schneider and Kurt Hamilton. They've probably been on more episodes than anyone else. But we've had John Wilkie, who I met because of this whole ordeal.
I saw him last night. He wants to come back on.
I'm ready. John, you are welcome anytime, my friend. We'd love to have you. You're part of the family.
Next time we won't invite Brad or Kurt so you can talk.
Yeah, well, the turret does get kind of small. Yeah. When myself, Brad, and Kurt are all in the room, I don't know how you guys breathe.
Some big personalities there.
So, we've done some things like we've gone to Justin's House of Bourbon.
Yeah.
We've talked about our favorite cocktails. We've learned how to make Chuck, you've taught us how to make our own barrel-aged Manhattan, which is one of my absolute favorite drinks that there is on the planet. So we've done a lot of things.
Someday I'm going to have to make a Boulevardier.
Oh,
it took me long enough to learn how to pronounce it. I should be able to make one sometime or another.
So do you guys have a favorite episode, the most intriguing episode that we've done?
I really like the first, best, and last episode where we talk about our first experience, our best experience, and our last experience. That kind of was special to me. But I don't know. Chuck, do you have one?
That last episode, and then there were 6 where we had Aaron and Michael come in from the Broken Cork podcast. They're really knowledgeable, and Brent had us set up on a blind tasting of 6 tastings, and he said, now they may not all be bourbon, they may not be rye, they could be scotch, it could be some dark rum and so forth. He's trying to throw a curveball.
There might be some red herrings in there,
a little bit, but it was fun.
It was an impossible task and completely meaningless because nobody would ever sit down and say, bring me 6 things that I don't know what they are, and let me tell you what I think about them. But how much fun was that? And completely different results than what I thought we would have.
The thing that I found, I always say I don't have any golden palate, not like Michael and Aaron have, but I was pleased that I was very consistent with the things that I really like E.H. Taylor. That was my number 1. Things that I'm not really that crazy about, Van Winkle stuff, it just doesn't do anything for me, was like number 4. So
yeah.
And we talked about Casey Jones, the weeded being my second, my second favorite. So,
and that's what I liked about the blind tastings. You think just because Pappy Van Winkle's just so hard to get that it's going to be the number one sipper, and we've proven that that's not necessarily always the case.
Right.
And there's other people out there in the bourbon community that are proving that as well when they do blind tastings.
Aaron, actually, Van Winkle overall tied for first among the 6 panelists, and including Aaron and Michael. So, they talked about it was woody, meaning it had been aged for a long time. When I run across people who say, I don't really care for bourbon, my comment usually is, well, that's just more for the rest of us. So when I say Van Winkle's just not really my thing, that just means it's more for the rest of you guys.
Has that not been the theme of our little show here is drink what you love?
For real. Yeah. For real.
If you're like Brian and you just want to drink Cooper's Craft all the time, go for it. I mean, that's what we like. Now,
if you like to add ice to your bourbon.
yeah, if you like it neat, great. If you want to put it in a mixer or in a cocktail, fantastic.
It's a mamas and papas saying, go where you want to go, do what you want to do.
I couldn't have said any better, Chuck. I like that reference.
That was my Mama Cass.
I like that. I look like her, you sound like her. It was perfect. So there you go. Happy anniversary to us. What a fun time. We're going to keep going. If you keep listening, even if you don't listen, we're going to keep going. Because we have fun doing this, and how much have we learned? I don't know about you. You guys knew a lot more about bourbon than I did, and you still do. But
we keep learning.
I'm trying new juice all the time, and we're learning different things. I learned something from our friends over at the Broken Cork Podcast. They had a video out this last week talking about why the proof goes up in the barrel, and we've asked that question how many times.
I've got to hear that.
So it was postulated that it's the size of the molecule. Ethanol is larger than the water molecule. Water molecule obviously only has 3 atoms in it, and so it can permeate the wood and escape, whereas the ethanol has a harder time getting out of the barrel.
That's interesting. Where I was coming from is that alcohol evaporates at a lower temperature than water. So I thought that should be the thing that would evaporate first.
Right. On
the other hand, I had a friend years ago who temporarily was in the vacuum cleaner business. And I remember him talking.
Did he say it really sucked?
He went to a convention with his boss, and a bunch of blowhards at this convention were showing off how much they knew about the vacuum cleaner industry. So his boss started talking about the suction to groove ratio. Completely made up, complete BS. And my friend just stood in awe as his boss had these other guys going, "Oh yeah, suction to groove ratio, absolutely."
Yeah. So I did say postulated. I'm not sure that's proven.
I like that,
but I do like the idea of, could it be that yes, alcohol evaporates quicker and turns into vapor, but it can't get out because of the larger size molecules. I don't know if that's true, but that's what our friends over at the Broken Cork podcast said.
There's just a lot
I'm going to find out.
A lot of mysteries regarding bourbon.
That there are, and I need a chemical engineer to send me an email to tell me that I'm an idiot, please. All right, fellas, today's episode. Let's get to it.
Yeah.
Over this last year, we've talked a lot about the fraternal nature of bourbon.
Absolutely.
We've met a lot of friends. Chuck, you talk about every time you go to a new distillery or back to the same distillery for the 12th time.
I do that.
You meet amazing people.
Sure. I just love the camaraderie, and you can kind of tell. There's people who are newbies; they know nothing about it. They kind of gag when they try the whiskey. That's fine, but you can just kind of tell. As the tour goes along and questions are asked, you can find somebody who's like, all right, this is one of my brothers right here. Yeah. So, after the tour and after the tasting, kind of sidle up to them and say, well, where are you from? And, what have you been at? And it's just cool. People love to compare notes about distilleries they've been to, stuff they've tasted. So, bourbon is very fraternal. It's all about that.
Absolutely. And there are new ways. Maybe they're old ways. There are ways for bourbon fans to get together and share their love for bourbon. And that is bourbon societies and bourbon clubs, right?
Yeah, for sure. So just out of the bat, a couple of different kinds of bourbon clubs. There's a bourbon club. There's a thing called a bourbon club that's basically a monthly or quarterly online subscription where you pay, $80 a month or something like that, and you'll get some type of mystery bourbon or whiskey in the mail. Mm-hmm. And that's fine. That's great. We're not talking about that. We're talking about people coming together, talking about their love, and because of their love for bourbon.
Right. It's kind of like a fraternity or a community organization of some sort. It doesn't have to be within a city or a metropolitan area. It could be virtual. Like we had a great episode talking to our friend Steve Higdon about the Big Bourbon Club, which started off as a virtual bourbon club
during COVID, I think.
During COVID, right? And we'll put a link to that episode in the show notes below. But there are all kind of bourbon clubs.
So let me tell you about my original involvement with a bourbon club here in our little town. On a Friday afternoon, one time, I got a phone call or a text from a buddy of mine, and he said, "Hey, it's time for us to meet for a board meeting." So it's like, all right, cool. We're going to meet at the Commonwealth Kitchen and Bar for a board meeting. I don't know what board meeting he's talking about, but if we're going to meet at the bar, then present and accounted for, sir. And so it was just kind of a joke. And we did that for a few months, and it was kind of random. Stanley would he'd round up a dozen guys and so forth, and we'd have a really good time. Well, one December, we went out to our friend Joe's house, a very lovely home. He put out a nice spread of food, and there was a larger crowd than usual. And Christmas, of course, was coming up. And Joe, tapped a glass for attention and said, "Hey, look, I've become aware of a woman, a grandmother, who's raising a granddaughter, and this grandmother's got nothing for Christmas for her granddaughter. Guys, I'm going to pass around the hat. Chip in and let's see if we can't do something nice for somebody." Nice. So we did that, and it was cool. Next thing I know, Joe is formally organizing the Men's Bourbon Society of Henderson. Now, let me preface. Men's Bourbon Society, I understand. Already in our community, there was an organization called the Partnership of Women, right. A philanthropic organization, a membership organization where these ladies, put up membership dues, annual membership dues, and they meet once a year and vote on how they want to expend that to philanthropic organizations. So you got the Partnership of Women. They're doing their thing. We started the Men's Bourbon Society. And from what I can tell, every bourbon club, every bourbon society is a little bit different. I'll just mention briefly how what our bourbon society is like. It's largely, it is philanthropic. We've given away over $100,000 in just 3 years. And also the Men's Bourbon Society during COVID was the organizing power behind a thing called the Henderson Employee Relief Fund, where we reached out to business people, city government, county government. That ended up being like $750,000 that was provided to provide relief to people who found themselves out of work very suddenly, and it was going to take weeks and weeks before unemployment checks were going to show up. Right. So the Men's Bourbon Society did a lot of good. But in terms of our month-to-month meetings, we usually meet at somebody's home, maybe their place of business. Brian, you're going to be hosting here
next month. Yeah,
next month, and you can talk about what you got lined up. I'm excited about it, but it's very social. We gather around. I think we got about 75 members, and maybe there's 50 guys in attendance, ranging from 22 to 75 or something like that. And it's just a chance to get acquainted. I usually try to find somebody that I don't talk with all the time. Talk with our love of bourbon, try different things, find out what's going on. Maybe a little bit of business gets conducted, but it's very much a social kind of a thing, and I look forward to it every month. Brian has experience with more bourbon clubs than I have, so
so the more traditional bourbon societies, I'm part of Evansville, Indiana's Bourbon Society, along with Owensboro, Kentucky's, and theirs are very similar in the fact that the dues each year is typically about $100. And you get typically a Glencairn, and then you get each month they'll hold a meeting. And the meetings consist of either a tasting of different types of bourbons, or they'll have a guest speaker come in. Last month, the Evansville Bourbon Society had Freddie Johnson come in.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
From Buffalo Trace.
Unfortunately, I wasn't able to make it. But, yeah, Freddie from Buffalo Trace came down.
I thought you were going to take me that month.
I was supposed to, but had to cancel at the last minute.
Wait a minute. Chuck got invited?
He did. Yeah. You always work, Brent. So.
Okay. Yeah, that's true.
So those bourbon societies are more your traditional bourbon societies. There's no philanthropy aspect to those. It's more about the bourbon.
A lot of these clubs, they get to do barrel picks.
Yeah, barrel picks. So barrel picks, Evansville and Owensboro, they typically do about 4 or 5 barrel picks every year. Now, the club itself can't buy the barrel, so they'll partner with the liquor store. They get the barrel picks in, they'll purchase it from the liquor store, and then each member has the right to buy the bottles.
And remind us what a barrel pick even is.
Barrel pick is essentially the club typically goes to the barrel pick. They'll choose from typically 3 to 5 barrels and select.
You're basically sampling from different barrels.
Straight from the barrel.
At the distillery.
At the distillery. Some of them are a small batch, so they'll mix a couple barrels together. Yep. But the typical single barrel is just as it implies, it's actual single barrel where they'll taste it. Some of them will dilute it down, like 1792 full proof, for instance. It might come in at 135 proof.
Yeah.
Well, they cut all theirs to 125. So you have to put a little water in, and but every distillery is a little different. But every bourbon society that like Evansville and Owensboro, they're all doing barrel picks.
Big Bourbon Club does that too.
Big Bourbon
I
Club
think
does
last
that.
time when we went to Louisville to attend one of those in person, I came back with 4 bottles of bourbon picks.
Yeah.
You sure did.
And what bourbon clubs do is they give access to barrel picks where typically an average person off the street can't just go on single barrel pick unless you work at a liquor store or you know somebody. You're not going to get the opportunity to do that. So that's a huge incentive for some people to actually go.
Even if I could
distillery.
buy a barrel, Dr. Gentastic would probably divorce me if I did. So it's really a great way to try, single barrel bourbons.
So how many club members would go to a pick?
So since COVID, the numbers have really dwindled. Before you could take 15, 20 people to a pick. Typically it's under 10, and more than likely the bigger distilleries, 4 to 6 people on average. Yeah. But the bourbon societies typically want all their board members or whomever to do the pick. And the reason they do that is because if the pick is bad, it's on them. You know.
You don't want to pick a skunky barrel. Right,
exactly. And now a lot of these bourbon societies, they reach out to the distilleries themselves. But like I said, you have to go through a liquor store to do it. Owensboro Bourbon Society, actually, the guy that runs that, he started it, I think, about 15 years ago.
Is that right?
It was one of the first ones, was the first one in Western Kentucky.
I think one of the first ones in the state outside of Louisville, was it not?
I believe so. I know Paducah was shortly after Owensboro, but yeah, it's one of the first ones. And just so happens the guy's not even from Kentucky. He's from like Boston.
There is a big bourbon society in Boston. Almost any town of any size in Kentucky has a bourbon society, and again, the rules are all different. Some of them have websites. Some of them have websites with members only areas. Some of them have Facebook pages. Some of them have YouTube videos talking about their organizations. So almost any town of any city of any size in Kentucky, there's going to be some type of bourbon thingamajig there. But I've read about bourbon societies or bourbon clubs. Boston, Chicago, St. Louis. Out in Oakland, there is the Black Bourbon Society. They claim they've got 30,000 members.
I was just about to say, not only are they in communities, but they're in constituencies and in certain, any way you could break up people. There are women bourbon societies. There are African-American bourbon societies.
There's a British Bourbon Society.
Yes, absolutely.
And with Facebook now, there's a lot more clubs on Facebook as well. Mm-hmm. I'm part of the Warrior Barrel Society, which is basically a bunch of veterans who, have an affinity for bourbon. And we just get on there, do a toast to whatever, and call somebody out, and then they have to drink some bourbon as well. Mm-hmm. And what's great, I've never went on any of their field trips, but every year, a few times a year, they'll do barrel picks, and they'll have golf outings and things of that nature. And these are people who have never met before who will meet to go play golf together, but it's their love of bourbon that, unites them and brings them together.
So I've read a little bit about a really cool bourbon club up in Louisville. It started, I think, this past spring, Watch Hill proper in East Louisville, which is a very fashionable part of Louisville. See, there went my bottle. I'm keeping my mouth so close to the microphone.
You were so close, Chuck. So close.
I'm going home empty-handed. So it cost a lot. The initiation is more than $1,000. You pay nearly $1,000 a year. But they have their own venue. They have a kitchen, bar. They serve good food. A lot of leather seating. Looks very clubby and so forth like that. You can bring guests. I think the members, for their membership, they get a discount on what they buy. Pretty exclusive. I'm looking for one of my well-heeled friends to invite me very soon. There are big bourbon societies. I mentioned that one, the one out in Oakland. I've heard about a bourbon society in Louisville that has 12 members. The idea, there's 12 months of the year, so each member hosts 1 month.
Is this barred?
It's barred, yep. The Bourbon and Rye Drinking Society?
Something like that, yeah. I read about that one earlier today.
Yeah, Drinker Society.
It actually started, was one of the very first ones, I think, in the nation, maybe 20 years ago or so. And they eventually disbanded as members moved away. Yes. or lost interest or whatever. And then the founder rekindled this effort, did they not? Because they were members of the big societies, and they really wanted that small club feel again, I think.
So you're a member of bourbon clubs where you will have like a formal program and you'll hear from a distiller, the Henderson Men's Bourbon Society. We've done that a time or two, but they're usually a lot more informal. So which format do you prefer, or do you like both of them,
I
Brian?
like both. I mean, I think both of them have a place. There's a big difference between Evansville and Owensboro compared to Henderson. There's some things I like more about Henderson as opposed to Evansville, and vice versa. I like that about Evansville and Owensboro that you have speakers that come in more often, and you actually get to meet with some of the distillers and some of the owners of these craft distilleries and larger distilleries, and because they really get to tell their story. You can look their stories up online, but it's even better to have them in person to talk about it and about some of the decisions that they've made and some of the bourbon that they've created out of accident. Just like Peerless, the double oak. That they didn't do that on purpose. It was because they had a leaky barrel. On the other hand, I like Henderson because it's more about just the social aspect. It's nice to go in and not have a bunch of bourbon snobs sniffing their bourbon and talking about the tasting notes and all that stuff. We can all agree that that's really not us. We like what we like, and that's about it. But that's what I really like about Henderson. It's more laid back, more about the social aspects. And I think most people, they like what they like. And, if you're into the history of bourbon and things of that nature, a club like Evansville or Owensboro, would be more fitting.
I know what the solution is for me. I've got to be a member of more than one bourbon society.
I do too, absolutely.
Because I love the presentations, I love the history, but I also love the camaraderie, especially in our little town of getting to know. You know a lot of people, but you can get to know somebody a little bit better than you did before and form connections. And it's love it. It's
a lot like bourbon. I love Cooper's Craft. I also love Kentucky Owl Confiscated. Yeah. There's only about $100 difference in price between the two. And
not like Henderson Evansville.
That's exactly right. So how much fun is it to be part of these clubs and
it's good
meet
stuff.
People?
So look online, see if there's an organization in your community, find out how open they are to new members. Like I said, a lot of them have Facebook pages or websites, and it might really just turn out to be your jam.
You never know what's going to happen. About a little more than a year ago, I went to one of these meetings, and our friend Brad Schneider says, "Hey, I want to introduce you to somebody." So this is Brian McDaniels. He owns the beverage barns. He's heard that you want to do a bourbon podcast. You should talk to him.
History was being made,
and so we sat down at Chase Fulcher's Best One Insurance outside on his deck, outside the office.
I remember that night.
And I said, you know what, if we're going to do this, we got to have Chuck Stinnett, because he knows everything there is to know about bourbon.
Untrue.
And pretty close. And there you go. So here we are talking into microphone.
So Brian, you are hosting the Men's Bourbon Society in this next month. So tell us what to expect there.
So if anybody's familiar with the Beverage Barn, the Lumber Yard on Barrett Boulevard is where I'll be hosting it. Obviously, we have a lot of members, and my house just isn't big enough. So we're going to have 3 different distilleries out there: Green River, Casey Jones, and RD1. We'll all be out there to speak about their bourbons. We're going to have beer and different bourbons. And the way our Henderson Club is set up, somebody hosts, and they provide all the alcohol.
Yes.
So that will be taking place, and then we're supposed to have our annual meeting, so we'll discuss some business after we get a little cocktails in us. Just makes things go easier.
See where our philanthropy is going to be going.
See where we're going to put our money. And if you're in the Henderson area and you're listening to this, reach out to us. I'd love to have you come by and stop by and see what our Bourbon Society is all about. It's a great society, and there's a bunch of great people part of it.
Cool stuff.
So there you go. That's a little bit about bourbon societies and bourbon clubs. Fellas, anything else that you can think of we need to add to this discussion?
Let's see here. If you're going to drink, how should you do it?
Responsibly.
Responsibly.
Please drink responsibly.